Well, we've been talking in this series this summer called Canoeing the Mountains. We've been talking about adventures. And we've been talking about the challenges and the opportunities that adventures bring, and kind of most focusing on the characteristics that are necessary for us when we are traveling along the journey and things start to go not according to plan. So all of us, for the most part, if we're following the typical routine and the arc of our days or our weeks, you get up in the morning, you do X or Y, you get somebody ready for school, you get yourself ready for work, you do this, you do that, you make your way here, and then you kind of rinse and repeat and start over the next day, and then days become weeks. And when life is on a pattern like that, we're all fairly good at doing that. And the story that we've been studying, or the story we've been looking at through Canoeing the Mountains, has been the story of Lewis and Clark. And their journey began right there in the lower right-hand corner in St. Louis. They began their journey to find the way to the Pacific Ocean. The Louisiana Purchase had recently been made, and we needed a way to get across this massive country to the Pacific Ocean. And the hope was that there would be a waterway. And so Lewis and Clark, their pictures are there, assembled a team of expert rafters, and they began going up the Missouri River from St. Louis. And as long as they stayed on the Missouri River day in and day out, it was fairly predictable. It was hard work because they were going against the current, but they just followed the path, and they did what they knew they were supposed to do, and they had some mapping idea, understanding of where the Missouri River went. And things, were difficult, and there were some beautiful sights and some very boring days, but that's how life kind of is. But where it got interesting was right up there. When they got to the point where the Missouri River wasn't going to take them any further because they ran into, do you remember what they ran into? Yeah, this massive mountain range that just did not show up on the maps that they had. And it's when they got to that point. Have you guys ever been working through life, doing this or that, and kind of plodding along, and all of a sudden something hits you, comes into your field of sight, or comes across your path that you had no idea was coming, that kind of takes you away from the ordinary, everyday things that you were doing and the predictable nature of your routine, right? Have you guys experienced that? So that's what this group was. They were a Corps of Discovery, Lewis and Clark at their helm. They knew what they were supposed to do, and as long as they had the Missouri River to follow, they were doing great work until they got to the Rocky Mountains. And it was at that point they had to remember that our job is not to be rafters. Our job is not to be canoeists. Our job is not necessarily even to follow the Missouri River. Our job is to get to the Pacific Ocean. And so we're going to do what it takes to get to the Pacific Ocean. And if getting to the Pacific Ocean means we have to burn our canoes and find some indigenous leaders like this young pregnant woman named Sacagawea and allow her to lead us, and we learn how to become mountain climbers, then that's what we're going to do. It's in those seasons of life where things cease going the way you thought they were going to go, and perhaps the way things went for months, years. In fact, things that you think are so predictable that they themselves become gods. It always has to be done this way. That's the way things happen. That's the way life works. Well, until all of a sudden it doesn't, and you have to figure out how to become a mountaineer. You have to figure out how to deal with the unpredictability of life. And it's at these seasons in life, and at this season of life for the Lewis and Clark and their Corps of Discovery, that they had to reinvest in why are we doing what we're doing? And we need to be willing to let go of our canoes and become mountain climbers so that we can get to the Pacific Ocean. And in our own lives, it's when we get to those difficult points where we have to say, what is my life all about? Where is my destination? Where am I trying to get? What kind of person am I trying to be? What kind of ideals do I have in my life? So that when I get to the end of my life, I can say that I've made it. And rather than being so caught up and worried about how it is and the things that I've been doing to get there, to remind myself of the kind of person I want to be and the destination that I want to reach by myself or with my family or with the community, and recommit myself to that larger goal and that larger purpose. And if we can connect with our why, we can reconnect with our destination, we can make it through even the most difficult of times. And sometimes those times can teach us things that the months and the years on the Missouri or the predictable paths never could. It doesn't mean it's necessarily going to be easy or necessarily going to be fun. but we can learn a lot from those seasons, especially if you're traveling with people who are committed to the same destination. We can support each other and encourage each other. I want to tell a couple of other stories this morning about a couple of other adventurers. And the first one is Ernest Shackleton. You guys heard the story of Ernest Shackleton? Ernest Shackleton, so Lewis and Clark were about a little over 200 years ago, the early 1800s. Ernest Shackleton was an adventurer from about 100 years ago, and he was destined to kind of conquer the final thing that needed to be conquered. Basically, every place else in the globe had been traversed except for one place that humans hadn't gotten to yet, and that was the South Pole. And so Shackleton was going to put together a group of adventurers and head to the South Pole, make his way across the ice, and plant his stake in the South Pole. And so he got a group of adventurers together with him, and they set forth on a ship called the Endurance. Has anybody read this book or seen the movie? It's a fantastic story. So they get aboard the Endurance, and they set off from Great Britain, and they start heading south through the Atlantic, right? Further and further and further south. They had done their planning. They knew when they had to go, when was the optimal time, and what they thought the route was going to be, but no one had ever been to the South Pole, so there wasn't really a map they could follow. They knew they were going to have to figure out a lot of this once they got there. So they get south in the Atlantic, and they get south past the tip of South America. They get past the Shetland Islands, and not the Shetland Islands, where did we go to war? Falkland Islands, thank you. The Shetland Islands, they probably passed those. Maybe they went north out of Great Britain, Shetland Islands south, got to the Falkland Islands, kept going south past the Falkland Islands, and then something they didn't expect happened. Winter came about a month early. And so as they were heading through the Arctic Sea towards Antarctica, all of a sudden they recognized that they were bumping into chunks of ice, and then those chunks of ice became solid ice, which initially they could break through, but then the ice got so solid they could no longer break through it, and they found themselves surrounded by ice, and they found themselves then drifting with the ice, not necessarily where they wanted to go, but in a direction they hadn't planned. And at some point, in fact, the ice got so strong and thick that it began to break the ship, the Endurance, down. And so at that point, they had to abandon ship, and they got off the ship, took as many provisions as they could, a couple of lifeboats, and they began a journey across the Arctic tundra in a way that they hadn't planned, right? They started to try to head north because they knew that was their only hope at that point. And so they spent months, and remember, most of this is in darkness, frigid cold, not what they expected. It was a horrible, horrible journey. And they made these provisional camps and made their way further and further north until they finally got to some broken water, and thankfully they had brought along the lifeboats, and so they jumped in those and they began to canoe or paddle out into the ocean, and the first thing they ran into, an uninhabitable island called Elephant Island. It was a desolate, horrible place, windy and cold, but it was land. And they set up camp there while Shackleton took 4 of his best adventurers, and they shored up one of their little dinghies, and they tried to figure out how they could get to the closest habitable island where someone hopefully was living, and that was the South Georgia Island, which was 800 miles away, where they hoped there would be a whaling station. And so they set out in a life raft, in a dinghy, an open-air, 800-mile journey through the frigid South Pacific, and they made it to South Georgia Island. And once they got there, they had to climb a mountain range at the southern side of South Georgia Island. They didn't realize what was going to be there. Once they got over that, they found the whaling station, and they were able to signal back for help, and people came, and they were able to rescue all 28 men from this Shackleton adventure. 28 people saved. Now, the incredible thing about this story, obviously, is not that they made it to the South Pole. They didn't make it to the South Pole, but they did live again to try again, right? The remarkable thing is that they lived. I mean, people who have looked at this adventure have said these guys should never have lived. Not one of them should have returned, maybe half of them, but the fact that every single person that set off on this adventure made it back alive is ridiculous, is astounding. It's amazing. And so the question is, why? Why didn't one person kind of just give up on the ice? Why didn't 2 or 3 of them die? Why didn't somebody, fall overboard or whatever it was? And the answer comes in looking at the question, or looking at the ad that Shackleton put in the paper. What kind of people did he want to go with him on this journey? And it might not be historically accurate, but we believe in the London Times, this is the ad that Shackleton wrote. I want you to read it. Isn't that fantastic? Those of you who can't read it, I'll read it to you. Men wanted for hazardous journey, small wages, bitter cold, long months of complete darkness, constant danger, safe return doubtful, honor and recognition in case of success. Ernest Shackleton. He had a bunch of people sign up, and he chose the 28 best people. What kind of people answer a want ad like this? Desperate. People who are desperate, maybe. There's probably other things you could do, small wages. If you were that desperate, there's things you could do. But the kind of people that answer an ad like this and say they want to do this was a well-known, people knew that no one had been to the South Pole. So people knew Shackleton. The only person that answers an ad like this is the kind of person that is so focused on meeting that same goal, on doing the same thing, and someone who also understands what it's going to take, who understands how difficult the journey is going to be and signs up for it anyways. Someone who's not afraid of death, someone who's not afraid of consistent darkness and cold. And so the want ad itself, Shackleton saying, these are the kind of people I'm looking for, itself became a litmus test, right? Became a filter through which, if you're a complainer, if you're a person who likes things just so and can't really deviate from the way things typically go, you're not going to answer this ad. If you're the kind of person who needs your comfort and needs your tea in the morning and needs to have you're not going to answer this ad. The only people that are going to go on a journey like this are adventurers who are up for the task, who knows what's in store, and so all 28 of them made it back alive. So what do we learn from this? I want to tell you about one more adventurer. And if you're a good Sunday school teacher, you know the name of this adventurer. His name is Jesus. Right? That's just the one answer you got to have ready if you're going to be in Sunday school. Jesus. So we've kind of made Jesus into all sorts of things over the last 2,000 years. But when it comes down to it, talk about the greatest adventure, right? You have God becoming flesh and entering into humanity, a humanity that is imperfect and broken in a lot of ways, kind of killing themselves, saying, I want to go into that place, and I don't want to just reach the South Pole. I don't want to just, get to the Pacific Ocean. I want to save the world. I want to save humanity. I want to bring reconciliation and forgiveness. I want to bring community and healing and hope to the world, and I want to save creation. That's the adventure. And the name of the adventurer to kind of lead that whole thing was Jesus Christ. And if Jesus was to put an ad in the paper and say, this is the kind of people I'm looking for, how many of us would answer that ad? How many of us today, I'm a Christian. I am a Christian. That's who I am. I'm a follower of Jesus Christ. But how many of us think about what does that mean, actually? And what did that mean 2,000 years ago when this kind of radical rabbi from Nazareth, who was talking about God in ways that no one had really talked about God before and was doing miraculous things and was showing a way of leadership and a way of discipleship that really wasn't known to that point, to say, yes, I want to follow you, I want to be like you, I want to be a Christian, which means a little Christ. How many of us have thought about what that means, and if we answer that want ad, what it requires from us? So if Jesus was to put a want ad out for disciples, for people like you and me to answer, there's actually a number of places in the New Testament where you could find kind of a want ad of Jesus, but I want us to look at one of them, and it's in Matthew chapter 20. Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. Matthew is the first gospel in the Old Testament and the New Testament, and when you've got a pew Bible and you find what page number is on, I'd love you to call it out. Matthew chapter 20, starting in verse 20. 1197. And the thing that I love about this passage is that it gives you kind of a pull the curtains back, take a look at Jesus and his followers and what was going on in their life together. Now, we know Jesus was in his late 20s when he began his ministry. How many people here are older than your late 20s? Okay, a few of you. Jesus' disciples, so the leaders of our church, the first adventurers that got this whole thing going, Jesus' disciples were about how old? How old? No. 16, 17, right? They were at the age of being apprentices. They had to decide what they were going to do, and so they started to follow this rabbi. So you got 16, 17-year-olds who are following Jesus, and this is a great snippet. So here's Jesus, this 20-something, followed by these teenagers who are going to change the world and are going to start a church that you and I are going to join, and we're going to change the world just like them. Here's Jesus gathered together with them, and you know who shows up, kind of knocks on the door where they're gathered? Is two of the disciples, James and John, their brothers, their mom. Kind of wanting to just check up, making sure this kind of weird rabbi they've been following, like, well, what's going on here? And just so you understand what I understand for my sons and what I want for my son, just want to get things clear here. And so James and John's mom shows up, and this is how the passage goes. So starting in verse 20 of chapter 20, then the mother of Zebedee's sons, now forgive us as Christians and forgive the Bible, sadly women's names aren't typically shared as much as men's, and that's sad, that's a travesty, but Zebedee was her husband, and Zebedee's and this woman's two children were James and John. So these two teenagers are following Jesus. The mother of Zebedee's sons came to Jesus along with her sons. Can you just picture this? I'm just picturing James and John kind of following in behind their mom. And excuse me. And Jesus says, she said, I would like a favor. And Jesus says, what do you want? And she responded, this is it, just this. Say that these two sons of mine will sit, one at your right hand and one at your left in your kingdom. That's all. Right? I mean, I just want you to know, these two kids are pretty special. I mean, I know the other disciples, probably good guys. My kids, you got something special here. Just make sure when your whole kingdom thing happens, he's at the right and he's at the left. We won't have a problem with these two. And they're probably sitting there going, yeah, well, I kind of hope so, but I'm not sure. And Mom, you're embarrassing me, but at the same time, I kind of like it. And Jesus says, you don't know what you're asking. I don't think you know what you're asking. He says, can you drink from the cup that I'm about to drink from? What cup is he about to drink from at this point in his ministry? Before he dies, what kind of cup is he going to drink from? He's going to be persecuted. He's going to be run out of the church. He's going to be called all sorts of nasty things. He's going to be accused of things he's never done before. His friends are going to turn on him. A handful of people will stick with him, and then he will be tortured, and he will be killed. So, do you want to drink out of that cup? He says. And they said, we can. We will. And Jesus said to them, yes, you will. I'm sorry to say, but you will drink from my cup. But to sit at the right and left hand isn't mine to give. It belongs to those for whom the Father has prepared it. So it's interesting, this kind of parallel conversation that's happening between Jesus and James and John and his mother, and they're thinking one thing, but maybe as he's talking to them, it's dawning on them what they're actually asking for. Do you know what it really means to want to be a leader in this church? To be a follower of mine and to drink this cup? Do you? Okay. And now, it's kind of funny, you picture mom going away, and the other disciples are like, hey, hey, look at James and John, his mom are talking to Jesus. What's going on over there? And so, verse 24, when the other 10 disciples heard about what James and John had done and their mom, they became angry with the two brothers. But Jesus calls them all together and says, hey, come on over here a second. And he says, now, thinking about leadership and rulership, he says, you know that those who rule the Gentiles, they show off their authority over them with their high-ranking officials ordering them around. But that is not the way it will be with you. Whoever wants to be great among you will be what? Yeah, will be the last, will be the servant. Whoever wants to be first among you will be your slave. Just as the human one, Jesus called himself, just as the Son of Man, just as Jesus didn't come to be served, but rather to serve and to give his life, I love the CEB version, to give his life to liberate many people. So when we say that we are going to be followers of Jesus Christ, when we say that we want to be called Christians, and we want to be known as people who live after the ways of Jesus Christ, what are we getting ourselves into? What kind of leadership? What does that look like? What do you have to give? Time? Energy? What about your goals? What about your ambition? You give everything. You give everything. Following Jesus isn't something you do on one day of the week or a certain time or when you're feeling a certain way. Following Jesus is all in. It's the north. It becomes the North Star of your life. Following Jesus, that is the compass by which I live. It's the purpose by which I live. It's the way I align myself, what's right and wrong. It's how I talk to other people. It's how I think about other people. It's how I carry myself throughout the day, right? Before we say, yes, I'm a Christian and I hope we all do, or we're on our way to that, or I'm a follower of Jesus Christ, we need to think the same way that the people who followed Jacqueline have to think about, what am I getting myself into when I say this? Yes, Christ says, come to me, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light, and you'll find rest for your soul. But there is still a yoke. You got to come and be a part of something, and that something will call for all of you. Every part of you, your hopes, your ambitions, your profession, your education, your relationships, how you respond to things. It's everything. It used to be, there was a time in our society, there was a time in this church where if you were called, as some people have been recently in the last few weeks here at Second, called to be an elder, to serve on the session, to be an elder of Second Presbyterian Church, your name, and you would have been a man, your name would have been put in the newspaper, in the Kansas City Star. And there would have been some prestige and some honor that went along with being an elder or a leader in the church at that level. That's really not the case anymore. In fact, you could argue it might be the opposite. People might kind of wonder what kind of person you are if you're a religious freak or a fanatic. And what it means to be an elder, what it means to be a leader in the church, what it means to be someone who says, I'm going to be committed to advancing the work of Jesus Christ, following Christ, and working together with others to advance the kingdom of Christ in and through this place. It means most of the work that you're doing happens behind the scenes and people don't see it. It means that you're getting ready for Sunday school kickoff and you're the one who gets here early and you're scrubbing strawberries in the kitchen, or you're cooking or you're baking, and any time we have a gathering like that, this fantastic party that happened downstairs, anytime we get together and worship like this, there are literally dozens of people who weeks beforehand or days beforehand or early in the morning get here early, and no one ever sees what they do, but they plug in and they give their hours and they serve their time. Or some of you who have stepped in and helped out kind of at the last minute with a youth mission trip, and you don't get much sleep and you don't get much thanks, but you allow a group of youth to experience something and get outside of their comfort zone and be the hands of Christ in ways they never would before. I was just talking to Don Robb, who's a deacon of ours, and he said becoming a deacon has helped him to see the job that he does. He does some work at Union Station, and he helps people with giving directions and such. And he said, I've always tried to be a good person before, but since I've been a deacon at Second Presbyterian Church, I've been thinking about every handicapped person that I welcome, or every kid that's getting off the bus or the train, and they don't have the money, and so their mom is there to help them pay for it, or any person who's visiting from out of town. He goes, I just try to see myself as the hands of Christ, and I try to look everybody in the eye, or the homeless person that asks me for something, and I try to greet them. And if I see them again, I try to remember their name. This whole thing has kind of helped me to think about what I do in a new way. And as Don was telling me that story, I said, hallelujah. That's what we're all supposed to be doing. That's what I'm supposed to be doing. It was a challenge to me. Whatever you do, whether in word or in deed, in action or in thought, it's to be infused by and transformed by Jesus Christ, so that every part of us is given over to care for others and to give our lives so that many others can be liberated and can know the hope and the joy, the salvation, the reconciliation of Jesus Christ in and through us. It's all in. That's what Christ calls us to. And then there's this other part of ourself that we're called to give, and it's a part of ourself that we guard perhaps even more than our time and our energy, and that's our money. None of us have extra money we're kind of wondering what to do with, and so we think we'll give $1,000 to the church. Right? None of us have extra money at the end that we're thinking about, where can I give this? But when it comes to following Jesus Christ and being a part of the church, this isn't my rule. This is the tradition, and this is what the words are of Scripture. It's not the extra money. It's not the extra stuff you might have to give. It's the first money that you give. The first 10% that you get, you give. And for some of us, we give to different charities and different places, but it's really important that that is part of who we are, because as followers of Jesus Christ, and especially as American followers of Jesus Christ, there's nothing that's more personal to us than our money and more indicative of who you are. You want to see the moral account of someone's life? Look at their checkbook. Look at their credit card statement. Where are we spending our money? And so God says, give your first fruits to me. The first 10% go to me. Give to others. Give to the work of Christ in the world. And then you can give to the other things. It's not comfortable to talk about. And I didn't become a pastor to tell people about what to do with their money. But I can tell you this. It's when I or Stacy and I have been the most generous in our lives, and we have sought to give first where we have kind of experienced a bit of a release from the pain and the struggle and the obsession that we can have with our money and our stuff. This is what it looks like for Second Presbyterian Church. I'm just going to kind of show you all your cards on the table, right? Our budget is a little over about $1.2 million a year, and the vast majority of the money that we get to run things comes from gifts from all of you, from members and engaged people at Second Presbyterian Church. And that comes up to, in 2018, come up to about $820,000. And you can see in this chart, it shows how many different people gave regularly or pledged at these different increments. So from the very beginning, people who gave $1 a year up to people who give $50,000 a year. And we're fortunate at Second that we have people who take their following of Christ seriously and have resources with which they can give. I want to just break this down a little bit more for you. If we look at just the 4 top areas there in this chart, that's them broken down. We are fortunate that I would call, we have people who have high capacity ability at Second Presbyterian Church, a handful of them, and a handful of these people who have high capacity earning also give generously. And it's those people who have kind of a high capacity and give at a high capacity that really kind of disproportionately, but any nonprofit will tell you this, kind of bless our budget in that way. And I want to tell you, if you yourself are a high-capacity earner, and we are thankful that at Second Presbyterian Church we have such people in our pews, if you are a high-capacity earner and you could be a major giver to the goings-on of Second Presbyterian Church and the work of this church, I want to challenge you and encourage you, if Second isn't the primary place where you are giving, to make it so this coming year. So that we can together not just give our money, but actually incarnate the work of Christ and be the hands of Christ together and advance the good things of Christ. We are thankful and fortunate to have people who can give at generous levels, but I want to tell you, and there are people at Second actually who we don't see very often who continue to give because perhaps they're at a physical disadvantage or a place in their life, but they make sure that a check comes in or something happens on a regular basis, and some of these are generous givers, and they're not necessarily benefiting from what's happening at Second on a daily basis or a weekly basis. I want to tell you also, there are people in this age range, these aren't just older members who've got a lot of money or thankfully are at a place of life where they've got a lot to give. A handful of the folks that give in this area are in their 30s, in their 40s. There's one couple who is recorded here who aren't even members, who got very involved. They've got 3 young kids, care about the ministry here and about their faith here. They gave $8,000 last year to Second Presbyterian Church, not because they got a ton of money, but because they chose to tithe. And together between the two of them, they make $80,000. Stacy and I would be in the top 3 tiers here, and I tell you that not to call us out, but to let you know that we're in. This isn't a pastor who's just talking about you and talking to you on this stuff. This is stuff that we try to do as well. And we talk every year about how much we're going to give and how we're going to give more until we feel it. We've got a group of folks kind of in this middle range where a good chunk of our resources come from, and these are people in our area that I would imagine fit kind of within the typical demographics and are doing their best, I think, to give of a percentage, and very thankful for the generosity of families and individuals who do that. And a lot of these folks are people who are on fixed income, people who are students, and so the generosity is a blessing. It's overwhelming to me. There's another group of people that you're probably not aware of. We've got a number of youth and children in our church that give that pledge, that make a commitment to give every year. A number of our youth actually made a commitment to the capital campaign to give $5 or $10 or $20 a year towards our capital campaign, and I think that's pretty amazing. We've got a group of folks who give as much as they can, and there are a lot of people who are giving for the first time, and my encouragement would be to continue to think about how you could perhaps take another step in generosity. We've got a number of people who worship at Second who cannot give for various reasons, and they're at a certain place in their life where they can't, and that's okay. But people give in other ways. And if you would love help in kind of working with debt or struggles that keep you from being able to give the way that you want to, I would love to talk to you about that. We've got some resources that perhaps we could help you with. We've got an opportunity in this upcoming year for us to kind of step up and take our faith seriously and make sure we know what we're in for. In January of 2019, the angel gift, which was a $1 million gift, which was given to this church a little over 5 years ago, runs out. And it's been infusing our budget with roughly $80,000 or $90,000 a year so that we could launch something like the Open Table, so that we could hire somebody like Alex Treaster and begin a social media outreach and a new website, so that we could have a full-time youth director and put more focus on our mission, support our finances and our financial office a little bit more. And all of those areas have seen growth, but not to the point where we have gotten sustainable. And so we're going to have to really tighten our belts next year, and we're going to have to deal with some attrition of staff and not fill some positions. Right now, our staff are slated not to get any increases or cost of living increases for next year, so that we can make it work. And plus, we're going to all need to give a little bit more. It's an opportunity for us to think about who we are and where we are, and if we are kind of doing the homework of answering the want ad that Christ has put out for us, and to the extent that we are truly giving of our time, our energy, and of our resources in a way that will make this adventure, as we kind of move off the map into some uncharted territory for the church, a success. And I believe it will be. As we continue to follow this adventurer, Jesus Christ, and our comfortable maps of old are not serving us the way they used to, and we head into uncharted territory as the church, we remember and we recommit ourselves to the fact that we are the hope of the world. We are the community through which a gospel of inclusion and welcome and grace and reconciliation are made known to the world. It's a hazardous journey. Safe return, doubtful. Must be willing to become a servant and give our very selves to work for the liberation of others. May the Lord bless us and keep us and fill us and lead us as we embark on another season of this life-defining adventure together. Amen? Amen.